The world just woke up to a shocking reality. Africa's cotton empire has a new master, and it's not America. India just swooped in, forging a historic alliance with African nations, transforming raw cotton into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse, leaving Western markets reeling. From Burkina Faso to Tanzania, farmers are finally taking control of their wealth, their destiny, and their future. This isn't just trade, it's a global power shift. Stay tuned, because the cotton revolution is here, and the US has no idea what's coming next.
The world first felt the tremor on a quiet Monday morning, when headlines rolled across global screens like a spreading wildfire. India partners with Africa to form the largest cotton consortium in modern history. Markets fluttered, diplomats paused, economists recalculated forecasts. But in the heart of Africa, from the plains of Burkina Faso to the cotton belts of Mali, Benin, Chad, and Tanzania, the news wasn't a shock. It was the culmination of whispered preparations, strategic patience, and a long-awaited return to continental self-determination. For decades, Africa had produced nearly 25% of the world's cotton, yet returned barely a fraction of the profit. More than half of its raw cotton was exported unprocessed, often to Asia or Europe, where it was spun, woven, branded, and resold to the world at astronomical margins. African farmers remained at the bottom of the value chain, while international corporations dictated prices that barely covered production costs. Every planting season, Africans tilled hope into their soil, but every harvest season they were forced to accept prices that made survival a negotiation. Burkina Faso, once Africa's largest producer of high-quality cotton, had spent years in quiet rebellion. Its farmers dreamed of industrial autonomy, spinning mills, textile factories, and a price system that respected their labor. Mali, Benin, and Chad shared similar frustrations. Tanzania and Ethiopia possessed vast potential, yet lacked strategic alliances. Even giants like Nigeria felt trapped in old economic patterns, exporting raw goods and importing finished products at punishing costs. That's when India entered the stage, quietly at first, almost unnoticeably, like a shadow slipping across a wall. The Indian government had spent the last decade strengthening ties across Africa, building railways in Tanzania, digital payment systems in Kenya, pharmaceutical supply networks in Nigeria, and agricultural innovation hubs in Ethiopia. The world saw these moves as routine diplomatic gestures, but behind closed doors, New Delhi had been mapping something far larger. And the African Union had noticed. The seeds of the alliance were planted in Addis Ababa 2 years before the global shockwave. Delegates from Burkina Faso, Mali, Benin, and Chad had invited Indian economic strategists to a discreet meeting. The agenda was simple. Could Africa and India create a new global cotton value chain, one that rivaled America, China, and Western Europe? Not as colonizer and colonized, but as equal partners bound by mutual interest and shared history. India, with its vast textile industry, was eager. It was the world's second-largest cotton manufacturer, but struggled with raw material shortages and rising domestic costs. Africa had land, labor, and quality crops. India had machinery, processing expertise, and global manufacturing experience. And most importantly, both regions had been marginalized by Western price setting for decades. Their partnership wouldn't just be economic, it would be revolutionary. The final spark came when Burkina Faso's agriculture minister delivered a passionate appeal for Pan-African industrial unity. His words struck like iron against flint. Africa will no longer export its future in bales and bundles. We will weave our destiny into cloth. And we welcome any partner who respects us enough to walk beside us, not above us. India's ambassador leaned forward, hands clasped, and replied, "Then let us build an empire of value, together." The Cotton Alliance Pact was drafted over 37 intense meetings across Ouagadougou, New Delhi, Addis Ababa, and Johannesburg. The final agreement outlined a grand strategy. Africa would supply raw cotton and land for new textile zones, while India would provide machinery, capital, and training. Jointly, they would produce finished textiles branded under a new label, Afro-Indian Cotton Collective. More importantly, profits would be split evenly, and factories would be majority-owned by African nations, a radical departure from past foreign partnerships. But the most explosive clause, the one the United States would later call economically destabilizing, declared that Africa would reduce raw cotton exports to America by 60% within the first year. It was a strike at the heart of the U.S. textile supply chain. The day the pact was signed, hundreds of farmers gathered in the cotton fields of Burkina Faso. Elderly women who had picked cotton since childhood wept as they watched the flags of India and Burkina Faso wave side by side. Young men who once dreamed of fleeing to Europe now whispered about becoming industrial entrepreneurs. In Mali, drummers filled the streets of Bamako with ancient rhythms celebrating autonomy. In Benin, women wore newly designed Ankara patterns printed with the emblem of the Cotton Collective, a blooming cotton flower surrounded by interlocking African and Indian motifs. The news didn't take long to reach Washington. The United States had long considered Africa's cotton industry its silent backbone. Cheap raw cotton from Africa fed American textile mills and supported massive clothing brands. Losing Africa to India wasn't just an inconvenience. It threatened billions in profits, disrupted supply lines, and risked empowering a continent the West preferred indebted, divided, and dependent. Analysts at American think tanks scrambled to understand how the alliance had formed right under their radar. How had India pulled off what one frustrated senator called a diplomatic landslide? Within weeks, Washington launched new offers to African cotton-producing nations, higher purchase prices, agricultural aid, subsidies, even military cooperation packages disguised as security partnerships. Representatives from Benin and Chad were invited to closed-door dinners with American delegates. Rumors circulated that billions of dollars were on the table, but Africa had tasted dignity and refused to spit it out. One Burkinabe representative famously responded, "For 50 years you offered us crumbs. Now you offer cake only because someone else is cooking with us. We will not switch tables. We are building our own." India continued strengthening the alliance. Within months, modern textile plants began rising across Mali, Benin, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. Engineers from Mumbai and Chennai trained young African technicians in spinning, dyeing, and garment production. These weren't sweatshops. They were state-of-the-art factories powered by renewable energy, structured with fair labor policies and joint ownership systems. In Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu Hassan toured the first Indian-African textile complex. She ran her fingers along a spool of freshly spun cotton and whispered, "We have waited generations for this." Ethiopia, with its booming industrial zones, became the first country to produce millions of meters of Afro-Indian denim. Designers from Lagos and Delhi collaborated on new fabrics that blended African symbolism with South Asian weaving techniques. These textiles soon appeared in global fashion shows, celebrated for their cultural fusion. Meanwhile, India and Africa announced the Cotton Digital Exchange, an online platform bypassing Western commodity brokers, allowing African farmers to negotiate prices directly based on real-time market data. Prices rose by nearly 40% in the first quarter alone. Farmers who once lived hand-to-mouth suddenly had savings, plans, and dreams. Across West Africa, the transformation began changing social landscapes. In rural Mali, children whose parents once struggled to afford school fees now attended upgraded schools sponsored by cotton revenue. In northern Nigeria, textile apprenticeships replaced migration caravans. In Benin, women cooperatives turned cotton fabrics into clothing sold across ECOWAS markets, empowering thousands. Africa wasn't just producing cotton. Africa was producing value, producing identity, producing dignity. But the global shockwave was far from over. As African exports to India surged and American imports collapsed, U.S. lawmakers demanded retaliatory measures. Threats of sanctions buzzed through the air. An American senator growled on live television, "India has hijacked Africa's cotton sector." But African leaders responded calmly. Africa cannot be hijacked, only empowered. The world soon realized that the alliance wasn't simply economic. It symbolized a new geopolitical axis, a South-South partnership challenging centuries of Western dominance. Analysts called it the Cotton Revolution. Others called it a new non-aligned awakening. India became Africa's most trusted strategic partner. In return, Africa became central to India's global rise. Both regions found comfort in their shared histories. Former colonies who had endured exploitation, now rising together. The first Global Cotton Summit in Addis Ababa marked the official turning point. Delegates from over 30 African nations sat beside Indian ministers. Screens display production forecasts, expansion plans, and revenue projections surpassing anything the West ever expected Africa to achieve. A hush settled over the hall when the African Union chairperson took the podium. For too long, she began, Africa's wealth has been shipped away in ships bearing foreign flags. Today, we declare to the world that Africa will no longer be a supplier of raw dreams. We will process our dreams. We will package them. We will brand them. And we will sell them on our own terms. Thunderous applause erupted. Indian diplomats bowed respectfully. Outside the summit hall, thousands of young Africans celebrated. Artists, tailors, entrepreneurs, cotton farmers, students. The streets of Addis Ababa overflowed with Afro-Indian flags, music blending Bhangra and Afrobeats, dancers swirling in fabrics produced from the newly unified cotton value chain. For the first time in history, Africa wasn't reacting to global shifts. Africa was creating them. As night fell over the city, fireworks burst above the skyline. A new era was taking shape, one woven from threads of sovereignty, cooperation, and shared resilience. Africa had not simply joined the global market, it had redefined it. India, once a distant partner, had become an ally in the continent's long quest to reclaim its economic destiny. America, still stunned, had no choice but to adapt to the new geopolitical reality, a world where Africa was no longer a passive participant but an architect of its own future. And across the cotton fields of Burkina Faso, under the warm glow of an African moon, farmers gazed at the horizon and smiled. For the first time in generations, they knew the cotton in their hands no longer belonged to the world. It belonged to Africa, and Africa was ready to spin its future.